we've seen a lot of the strength. We haven't seen so much of the peace thus far. God help us if the United States does launch some sort of limited strike on Iran's capacities. There's going to be some sort of response from the Iranian government. I mean, they can't not.
The United States is hovering on the edge of war with Iran, and the possibility of such a conflict is causing a lot of concern, not only on the left. The prospect of war has fueled a massive and heated debate on the right. On one side, people like Senator Lindsey Graham and Senator Ted Cruz favour maximal US support for Israel. On the other, influential MAGA figures like Steve Bannon and Tucker Carlson, and even online influencers like Theo Vaughn, are very sceptical. The divide was seen in the extraordinary interview between Carlson and Cruz that has gone viral in recent days. So what's going on? I'm glad to be joined by Brandan Buck. Brandan is a foreign policy research fellow and historian at the Cato Institute, and he's written extensively about the evolution of foreign policy thought within the Republican Party. Brandan, let's start with Tucker and Ted, just because it got so much attention. Were there things about that interview that stood out to you? Was there anything that surprised you? What did you make of it all?
I mean, I was a little bit surprised as far as Ted Cruz goes, just how honest he was about being a broker for Israel's security interests on Capitol Hill, despite at times him also trying to diffuse those accusations. And also what's interesting about that interview and also some other statements from members of the U.S. Senate is that they appear to be even more forward-leaning in their desire for U.S. involvement in this conflict than even Trump might seem at times. These folks are not talking about limited strikes on certain Iranian nuclear sites. They're openly talking about U.S. involvement in one form or another in a regime change war, which is completely antithetical to core interests of the MAGA movement and what America First, what that label has come to mean in recent years.
And let's delve into exactly that point, because what do you think is going on here, big picture, between, the MAGA movement, America First, whatever you want to term it, was obviously much more skeptical, I think, of foreign intervention generally, not only as it pertains to Israel, than had been the case in a previous generation of Republicans, particularly the George W. Bush generation. So what fueled that change? What precipitated that kind of divide in your mind?
Well, it's largely generational. I think if you look at the polling on this issue particularly since the start of Israel's war in Gaza and elsewhere, is that there's a generational shift within the country writ large, but also within the GOP, and that's fueled, I think, as a hangover to the global war on terror. Folks who are about my age, I'm a little over 40. They remember these past 20 years and the promise and the failure of various regime change operations in the region. And so when you have literally the same rhetoric about weapons of mass destruction, about first Tel Aviv and now New York, and frankly, a man at the helm in Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, being a figure in both episodes, it raises the hackles of people who remember vividly and also perhaps served. In my case, I served in Afghanistan. But there is a generational split. On the opposite end of this, you have older conservatives whose memories of Iran in the 80s and of course the hostage crisis still loom large for them. And so I think, for a while, this impulse to deny Iran the bomb, but also maintain a certain amount of distance from the region, these two things were not in tension, because at least it seemed that negotiations between the U.S. and Iran were bearing some fruit. But now they obviously are in tension with the start of Israel's war in Iran. And so now I think that's why you're seeing this quasi-civil war now in a way that we hadn't quite before.
And how would you characterize President Trump's position within that civil war? I mean, generationally, of course, he's part of the older generation of people you mentioned, but attitudinally, he seems to be much more in step not necessarily with skepticism of Israel, because I don't think he's that skeptical. Perhaps he could do with being more skeptical in some ways, but he's certainly skeptical of US foreign entanglements. So how do you sort of position him in this matrix?
Well, if I was the Donald Trump whisperer, I could probably make a lot more money than I am. I certainly think that he took the pulse of the base in a way that other politicians either couldn't or wouldn't. Um, but as you say, he also has fairly orthodox views on America's relationship with Israel. At times, if we just wind the clock back to a week ago, at times he was quite hawkish in his rhetoric on Iran, but at times he was quite dovish. He openly eschewed any notion of regime change in Iran. There was a big speech that he gave in Riyadh in which he just took to task the past 20 years. But again, there's this tension between this desire to not be involved in quagmires and never-ending wars, but at the same time wanting to maintain a so-called peace through strength. We've seen a lot of the strength. We haven't seen so much of the peace thus far, because even though the MAGA base, or certainly the GOP, has eschewed this notion of nation building, this notion of non-ending wars, they have not given up on the notion of American primacy in the world, particularly in the Middle East. And again, these two things were not in tension, but now that they are, and that's the worry that he's going to choose primacy over restraint.
And if that happens, and if US forces get directly involved in an assault on Iran, do you think that will deepen these divides that we're talking about within the right writ large, or do you think it is more likely that there will be a coalescing within the right around Trump's position if he goes in?
Well, I mean, I guess there's a very, very slim chance, and I think this is what some people are banking on in the administration, is that they can go in some sort of limited way using B-2 bombers to drop the really heavy GBU 57s on certain sites, particularly Fordo, and that there won't be some sort of blowback. That this will be a one-off. There's this notion that they can do this in the same way that they used drones to assassinate Soleimani during his first term. I think that's a completely fatuous comparison. Soleimani was one guy. He was in Iraq. It was a limited strike. This is a overt act of war. So I think far more likely is that if, God help us, if the United States does launch some sort of limited strike on Iran's capacities, there's going to be some sort of response from the Iranian government. I mean, they can't not. I mean, from their mind, this would be a direct strike on their existential survival. So in that case, if they lash out and there are serious American casualties, yes, I do believe that the blowback here domestically is going to be huge, because it's going to be very difficult in that case for the administration to push back from the table and declare mission accomplished, because then the impulse to wave the bloody shirt is going to be far too strong to resist.
Mm-hmm. On that perhaps rather bleak point, but we're in a rather bleak time, I think those have been great insights. Brandan Buck of the Cato Institute, thanks for joining us at The Hill.
Thank you.